Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Well, hello, and thank you for letting me join you on the Prison Pod. Today we have guests, which is always wonderful. We have representation of Maine Inside Out joining us today, Mr. Bruce King and Mr. Joseph Jackson. And I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourself. And I guess we're going to start with Joseph.
Well, yeah, thank you, Valerie. My name is Joseph Jackson. I'm the Director of Community Programming with Maine Inside Out. System-impacted person. Started my career off as a juvenile, and now I'm out here doing this work. I'm also the main Executive Director of Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition and campaign advisors, and one of the founders of Maine Youth Justice. I'm going to pass it over to Bruce.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Bruce King. I am the co-executive director of Maine Inside Out. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I am also a commissioner on the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations for Maine as a formerly incarcerated Mexican American. I also serve on the boards of MindBridge, which is a neuroscience organization that works around human rights issues and trying to improve outcomes for human rights defenders through the use of neuroscience, and also a board member of Maine Equal Justice. And we're an organization that works doing both lobbying and litigation around trying to improve outcomes around disparities, largely around economic outcomes for individuals living in poverty in the state of Maine.
So you guys both do a lot of other things other than just Maine Inside Out.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I didn't have my
Wear a lot of hats. How did the two of you meet?
You want me to take that one, Joseph? Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead. Do you want to try it, Joseph? Or I can give you my perspective as well as you can give yours. Go ahead.
I think I first met Bruce with some of my work with Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition. Maine Prison Advocacy Coalition would hold community strategy meetings. I think back then bi-monthly in various communities throughout the state. And Bruce came, and I think he and I instantly connected. Because we had shared background and shared identities, and the fact that we were both system impacted. And I think I really loved his methodology and his incarceration, one of the things I think that he was kind of like promoting and doing. And so I can remember that. But yeah, he and I have been, in the work together probably since that time, even before, Maine Inside Out.
Yeah. Actually, that meeting, I remember, I believe it was in Manchester, Maine. And so I had been out a few years prior to Joseph, trying to get some sort of just energy around things, around getting people to discuss alternatives to incarceration, shifts in how we approach corrections. And I say that with quotes. Both locally and nationally. I myself had spent my time in the federal prison system. And when I got out, I was working on a project that I called Incarsa Nation, which was the idea that many individuals around the country had experienced this, as well as young people. And so, I was just trying to get visibility. I had written a blog while I was away, and I made T-shirts that just said Incarsa Nation as two separate words. And it had the population. I was conservative and said 2.2 million. It was actually closer to 2.3 at the time in terms of individuals incarcerated in the country. But I didn't really see anybody talking about the issues prior to that. And then I heard about this organization that was attempting to kind of build a critical mass. And so finally made it up to a meeting after several months of not making it. And it just so happened, I believe, that it was Joseph's first meeting out. And but the organization had already been working with him because they were working on state level stuff. And so he had been doing so much inside, and that he was chairing the meeting right out the gate. And at the time, I think both of us kind of felt like nobody was discussing these issues. And here we are, I guess 10 or 12 years after we first started these conversations, and now it seems like these conversations are everywhere. So I believe that we are a little small part of that bigger critical mass that has built up over this time.
Absolutely.
What are the situations here in Maine with youth incarceration? I know that the Mountain View is no longer used for youth here in Charleston. How about the facility in South Portland? And what is being done to intervene with other programs other than incarceration that you're aware of?
Wow, that's a big question. I'll just start to say that youth incarceration remains a problem. I think that when Bruce was talking about when we first met, that population hovered between 170 and 200 of young people. Today, that number is drastically lower because of the light of the advocacy we've done. Particularly, they have regional care teams now that are looking to place young people, and giving them what they need in the communities where they come from. There's a lot of diversion, so to keep people out prior to going to youth facilities. I think because one is, what we determined was that many kids were in the facilities that didn't have a place to go. So they were just being in prison for not having a place to live. There were a huge segment of kids that were coming directly from the mental health sector, and particularly directly from in-care, being residential mental health places. And then, lastly, and which was some of the things that we've curtailed a little bit. And then I think lastly, we were incarcerating girls for being victims of sex trafficking. And so, raising those awareness about the way that we were treating kids and what we were doing, I think it was, led to some changes in the way that we kind of view it. Everybody, prison shouldn't be the one stop for everybody, And so, I think that some of those initiatives and direct conversations with the Department of Corrections, with the Department of Health and Human Services, have been paying off over the years. I don't know if you would add something else to that, Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things to just name out loud is that though we're talking about Charleston being no longer a youth facility, in some ways it is. So we actually in Maine Inside Out, we do work, we have a program in Charleston. It is no longer called particularly the youth facility that it is. But our program is specifically there with 18 to 25-year-olds. And so I think one thing just to submit around that issue is that the idea of youth, I think, needs to be expanded. And I know I had mentioned a mind bridge and the work that we do. And when it comes to, kind of the latest science around the development of the brain, is that we're seeing that individuals don't really enter. First of all, we've realized that the brain continues to develop throughout life, and that's actually very new, and it's very important. Before, we believed that the brain basically stopped developing right around 18. It was fixed. Neuroplasticity, which is the ability to create new neural pathways and develop new ways of thinking, was kind of thought to be stagnant. We've realized that isn't the case. And additionally, we found that the brain, in terms of adolescence and youth development, actually continues well into the mid to late 20s. So what Charleston does, and I'll give a little bit of credit to the DOC recognizing that and incorporating that, to recognize that though individuals over the age of 18 are tried as adults, that they may have different potential and different needs than the general prison population as general adults. And so there is a housing unit that is up there that is really focusing on that age group. And so we have young people that we had worked with in Long Creek, as well as other individuals that we work with up there, and we do performance groups with that. Our modality that we use with Maine Inside Out is Theater of the Oppressed, and we create original plays with individuals. It is acting for non-actors. It is a means by which they get to tell their stories and create dialogue, and that's the most important component. So I'll say that that's really been kind of front and center when it's come to all of our work. It's using theater, but also really focusing on how do we shift conversations. And then to rewind a little bit, when we started, long prior to the time that I was a part of Maine Inside Out, and also even Joseph has definitely been a part of the founding and development. But like 15 years ago when we started in Long Creek, people were being housed there for many reasons, as Joseph just alluded to. And the number was between like 250 and 300, right around there. Like the numbers were really high in terms of the individuals that were being housed there, and they were all young people. And so today, through the work, I believe, that has come out of both Maine Inside Out and Maine Youth Justice. Joseph is one of the founders, as he mentioned, as well as one of the advisors there, and I serve on the executive committee. We're working to change the way that people approach intervening in the lives of youth, and utilizing any sort of criminal charges, as well as all that goes along with that. And so these days we're looking at a number that hovers around 20. It can be in the teens, it can be in the mid-20s, but that's what we're seeing as far as youth that are there. And I think that the work that Maine Inside Out has done publicly, as well as Maine Youth Justice has done publicly, has really shifted how legislators, policymakers, and the general public approach intervening in the lives of youth that need some sort of intervention. And we continue to work on those issues to try to find ways to recognize that young people are still developing. There's a great amount of possibility and potential to all young people. And so recognizing that, I think the criminal justice system of all ages starts to reduce the possibilities of the lives of an individual. So I think part of our goal is to make sure that those possibilities, especially for young people, remain open and possible and creative.
One of the things that I thought was beautiful about Maine Inside Out is the fact that the youth are telling their stories, and the fact that the people who see them can see them in a different light. Because when we lock people away behind doors and don't see them, we don't see them, we don't hear them, it's like they don't matter. And I think when you see the people out there, living, breathing human beings, children still, I mean, let's face it, they're still children, in a very adult situation. And one of the things that I noticed in the last years has been addressing the trauma. Almost everyone that's incarcerated in this country has experienced trauma. And then the arrest trauma, the court trauma, going to prison trauma, and the layers upon layers upon layers that happen. And when you have children that have been through this trauma and they don't have the tools and the skills to navigate that world, that's one thing I see that you really help them find through the interactive theater, to the importance of telling the story. If either one of you might address that.
Well, I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate how you were framing that the work of, working with young people addresses trauma. Because when we're talking about these institutions, particularly prisons and correctional settings, everyone that within is being exposed to trauma, right? And so I think for me, when I think about the work that we do with young people using artwork, there's a restorative and healing aspect to art because, you create, you begin to think outside of yourself. You can pull it outside of yourself and now re-examine it with other folks. So I think that was one of the real benefits of kind of like not only empowering young people to get on stage to share their stories, right, which is also an aspect, but also being able to kind of like pull this thing out of themselves, look at it for what it is, and maybe, be some sort of healing modality, coming out of it. I think, and just lastly, I'll just say, I think the other aspect of it is that these young people are creating stories about their experiences and perceptions, which also include being on the inside. And so when the other component of the theater of the oppressed that, is not mentioned as much is that it's not just to be watched, it's to be experienced, right? And that the audience member becomes like spectators in a way, and particularly if they're decision makers, begin to see and look at what these young people are saying about their experiences, about what's happening in their lives. And then hopefully, if they have the power to do so, make some changes so that way that we can reduce the amount of trauma that they are being exposed to. I think that for us, all of these are like aspects of what we do this. But
we really need to bring their voices to the table because they do have the experience, and they experience it differently at different age levels. That's one thing I was really glad to hear about with Charleston, and I forgot that originally they called it the Young Offenders Program, but I think they've changed that title. When I first started doing prison work, we kind of divided it, and I worked with the 18 to 27-year-olds, and the other gentlemen who went in with me worked with the older population. And I saw the difference immediately, that the needs were different, and that level of development and social skills and all of the things that you need to navigate life have been stagnated because they go in so young. And it's so great to see programs like this that are healing and educational. And as you said, the audience experiences it.
Yeah, and if I can just interject, like a lot of our work now has kind of shifted. We continue to be in Charleston. We have intentions to continue. We are continuing that program. We're currently working on yet another. I believe it may be our third production that we've done with these young people. If not, yeah, I believe it's our third up in Charleston. Yeah, and so I believe we're there. But we've also been working in middle schools to try to interfere with the school to prison pipeline, which it really is based in kind of when young people have that trauma, they tend to react, and I think that's one thing that trauma removes from our process is we lose. And so from, once again, going back to that neuroscience perspective, your amygdala, the part that's fight or flight, tends to be privileged. It overpowers our frontal lobe, our ability to process, and our ability to be in community. And so the frontal lobe is really, when we look at the evolution of our relationships, that's what's made us successful as human beings, is our ability to be in community with one another. And that comes from that executive function that is not available when we've been really developed in a state of pure trauma and pure fight or flight. And so when we're in a state where we feel like we're being heard, where there is an exchange of ideas, both with the audience, the performers, and everybody in the community, that community becomes developed. And that is something that we are trying to instill within the young people in hopes of interfering with the process by which they just react. Because otherwise you're in a state where anytime you feel threatened, you're likely to do something impulsive. And the legal system, whether it's right or wrong, and I think there's a lot of reasons to say it's wrong, is that we tend to really attack individuals who act out of impulse. We do see some people being, charged around charges of premeditated issues that have had long processes of, okay, I'm going to make this decision. But the majority of things that people get prosecuted on are things that have taken place in split-second decision-making. And so that's something that becomes possible once we become a community becomes possible once we recognize that we're being listened to and that we can have conversations. Like if I know that you're listening to me, I'm less likely to just run up and punch you in the face because you're insulting me. Right. And so this is where transformative and restorative processes become possible, but they're only possible when we believe that we are in community with one another. And our brains know that trauma takes that away from us. And so community gives us that back. And so a big part of what we do, our mission explicitly is to build a world where everyone matters and belongs. And belonging implies a connection to community. So that's really at the core of the work that we do.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I just wanted to add, I mean, us being in school is intentional. I think one of the things that we saw going into Long Creek was 100% of the kids had been suspended. And so when you begin to see that 100% of the kids have been suspended, then we know where the intervention level lies. It lies when we first start identifying the young people getting in trouble. So that was one thing. And the other thing that was quite shocking is when we first started going into Long Creek, they had no minimum age for which they could incarcerate a youth. And so we were seeing kids as young as 10 and 11 being taken and thrown into prison. Fortunately, one of the things that we've been able to accomplish is to get that age level raised to 12. 12 still feels mighty young, doesn't it? And detained at 14. So now, as a state, what we're doing is holding kids as young as 12 and 14, and then to the time that, up to 21. And so, and then seeing the number also fuel the adult prison system, because 50% of the young people, at least 44%, commit reoffend within the first year of being released. So for us, it's really intentional to really go to the front line, to the gate, where we're seeing young people start to get in trouble. And so the age group we're actually working with is that age group that can actually go and find themselves incarcerated.
I have a question. Do you find youth that have incarcerated parents, is that a higher risk? Do you see that in Maine, that, how many youth are actually affected that have an incarcerated parent?
I'll let you answer that, Bruce.
I think there's multiple answers to that. And I think with Maine, we definitely see it. And I think this is where some of the racial and cultural divides kind of start to develop. A lot of the young people that we work with, and I've been working not only through Maine Inside Out, but I also used to work at Tree Street in Lewiston. I've worked in other capacities in Lewiston that has a large immigrant population. So a lot of those young people came from fairly traumatic experiences, intergenerational trauma, which, if we want to get really deep, and sorry to keep bringing it back to this neuroscience component, but I think it's really important. We're seeing that intergenerational trauma can really impact the outcomes of young people, and also individuals who are being raised in a community that their parents don't really know how to navigate, and therefore the people that they're looking to for direction may be struggling in different ways. So it can be really challenging. And so we're finding like a lot of young people from those communities being disproportionately, and I'll say misunderstood, and therefore finding themselves in situations where their needs are not being served, and thus they are seeking other outlets, and those outlets can often find themselves getting caught up in the criminal justice system.
Closely aligned with poverty. And so having, intergenerational poverty definitely increases one's ability and likelihood of having system impact of the criminal justice system.
And you make a huge point there with poverty, because there's so many levels of things that happen with poverty, from just having a quiet place to sleep at night, to having a safe place to live, having food on the table. Those are just the underlying things. And then you look at the schools in those neighborhoods. I'm appalled when I go online. I like to go on Google, to go and Google World, and you can zoom right into these different neighborhoods. Yeah. And when you see what the schools look like, that it's like they're just prisons.
Yes.
You know, they all have bars on the windows and they have metal detectors at the doors. And what kind of safety environment do we have for our children when that's what they have to go through? Not here in Maine, but
Yeah, not here in Maine, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, I think that what you start is you start getting people ready for the adult system when it's that way, right? And and prepping them. I think, for me, like when you start thinking about the other aspect of poverty, it's like, it's not just when you're talking about the schools, it's like the lack of resources. So even when we see a kid get in trouble, there's no resources for them versus if it's a wealthy school and we notice a kid get in trouble, then all kinds of resources are sent at that child to say, what's wrong with you? What's going on? Let's figure this out. What do you need? But that's not what's happening in the poor school, And so I think that, definitely want to just continue to harp on that, connection to poverty and the association of poverty and incarceration.
I think a lot of the children coming from other countries deal with that also. And I wanted to bring up the bullying. I think that those populations are really bullied terribly in the schools. I think the schools are trying to educate kids, but I don't want to say that we live in an ignorant country, but sometimes we live in a really ignorant country. And we need to start having more acceptance of others and realize the struggle is all ours. And I think that the schools really need to take some time and educate kids about just how bad some of these kids had it. And then they come here and we torture them too,
Yeah, I mean, and then, there's the other aspect, particularly with immigrants from African countries. I mean, they've been exposed to a racism that they don't even have any idea of, where versus someone who, like me, who's Black, that's grown up in this country, has some understanding of the racism that I face. But it's a complete shock and new to them that, that the type of racism they're going to be exposed to. And so I think that's one component. The other component is when we talk about bullying, it also is happening a lot to young people that, identify as LGBTQ youth. And so there's a lot of bullying that happens there, and disproportionately they find themselves system impacted in the system and touched by the criminal justice system, which also has huge components, right, around, what gender even is, right? And so, and how the harm that causes that population. So, yeah, just want to make sure we're lifting that up, particularly when we're talking about bullying.
I just wanted to bring up something, and I don't want to go on a depressing mention here, but I mean, it's the topic has to come up. I know that both of you, as I have, we've lost some of those we've worked with along the way for various different reasons. And I want to know if you have some sort of advice or crisis intervention ideas for those youth that get to that point that just they give up.
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, so being in this work, doing this work, we've experienced a lot of loss. And the loss is, obviously people are overdosing. Some have committed suicide. And then we're also losing people to the system as well. So we're watching all of these losses play out. I could tell you that at Maine Inside Out, we have different types of programming where we do mutual aid. While we try, we know that people are living in poverty, so we have a little bit of money that we can help, provide some folks that are in crisis, emergency funding, for when people need some emergency crisis funding. But even with all of that, and celebration and grief, and we have circles that do celebrations and grief and kind of help hold people through those hard times, and also celebrate them with them when things are going well. But I don't think we found the panacea. You know what I mean? As system impacted people, both Bruce and I serve as mentors and have mentored and guide and try to give the best advice we can and try to be there when the crisis is happening, and yet we still lose folks. So don't know the real answer to that, but just know that We haven't given up trying to figure it out, you know what I mean? But it's definitely, one of the things that makes this kind of work hard is because, we're developing relationships with folks. So as we're developing these relationships, we're also going through the highs and lows with them. And it's highly emotional work where it takes an emotional toll because it's hard not to take on the hard stuff.
I think that's also, yeah, everything that Joseph said is absolutely on point. And I think this is also where the audience has become a really important component of the work that we do.
I want to ask you about the Maine Youth Justice.
Yes. So Maine Youth Justice, we founded Maine Youth Justice about 5 years ago. As a campaign to close the only youth prison. Basically, realizing that all the things I was saying earlier about who we were incarcerated and the way that we were going about youth incarceration was wrong. And then the last thing I'll just say is, why should accountability look the same for kids as it does for adults? I think that's one of our biggest things, and we need to put the resources in the community to really respond to kids' needs, and that hasn't been done at all. Even this year, just recently, we had an article come out in the op-ed that says the state has invested all kinds of money in kids under 8, but none in kids and over 8. And that money that's been invested in kids over 8 is going to that youth facility out in South Portland, which right now is about, draining $18 million a year from taxpayers in the state of Maine, but yet only now holding less than 30 kids. So if you do the math, 18 million and 30, that's a tremendous amount of money to spend to incarcerate young people.
And can you imagine if some of that money trickled back to the families that those children come from, since we know that it starts with poverty?
Absolutely.
And this is one thing that's always bothered me, and I don't like to knock the foster care system, but foster care parents are paid better than women who are on social services.
Yes.
Almost double, I believe. I'm not sure of that. They are giving more resources to work with the children. They have outside resources to work with the children. Those are the things we need to bring into the home. And the other thing I think of with social services is if case managers visited families in the home where they're at, rather than making them go to an office who knows where they've got to find transportation and a babysitter and someone to pick the kids up from school because the appointment's at 3, and I think that's one thing that we've become very disconnected in some ways, and meeting people where they're at is so important. And that's one thing I see that you guys do with the youth is you come to them and you listen. And that is so huge. Listen. So many people have not listened to these youth. They have not cared what they had to say. And if you sit and take the time, you don't have to say anything sometimes. Just listen to them talk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you got to create spaces, trusting spaces, safe spaces for young people, and develop the trust and relationship so they can speak freely and talk about what's really going on with them, because they need to be sure of you first, right? Before they say it. I think that's one. But, even talking about Maine Youth Justice, so Maine Youth Justice has all youth. So everyone that's currently serves as staff, except for me, the old head, are under 26. And so I only serve as the advisor. And one of the reasons why we do that is because I could, when I pull them into like the advocacy world of adults like to tell young people what can't be done, right? Because we've learned that what can't be done. But young people don't know what can't be done. And therefore, anything can be done because they just have such, high aspirations. And then the last thing I'll say is, like, most major movements that's ever happened, social movements that have happened in this country, have happened because young people have been engaged and have been, out protesting and marching and doing the things that raise awareness around the issues that they want to confront. And so, yeah, major movements have happened in our society based on, the actions of young people.
And unfortunately, we as adults stifle their voices.
Yeah, we try.
They talk back. I understand there's a level of respect there, but children who talk back usually know how to stick up for themselves.
Yeah.
It's the ones that always do what everyone else tells them to do. Those are the kids that are going to be led down the wrong road, because they never made any decisions on their own.
Yeah.
So.
No, definitely want to just continue highlighting, creating platforms and spaces that young people's voice can enter into, particularly spaces that, where decisions are being made about them, right? I mean, we're making decisions about young people and not even talking to young people. So, which really makes no sense to me.
Mention around the importance of the audiences, which I know, Joseph, you had been talking about too. And, I think, and it's a point that actually we, our friend Brandon Brown, who may have been on the podcast before, and if he hasn't, I'm sure he will be. He talked about the fact that we spend a lot of time when it comes to reentry. And, of course, he was speaking around adults, but he's also the head of, he's also the new campaign manager of Maine Youth Justice. So he's working with us around these issues as well as working with young people in Long Creek. And, one thing that he said is that, with reentry, we focus so much around getting the individual ready to reenter society, but we spend very little time working on getting society ready for the reentering individual. And I think with young people, that's an even more important component. And I think that's something that our art does, is that our art really creates a dialogue where people who are part of general society, who may have no contact with the criminal justice system, the youth development system, any of those things, and it brings them into the conversation of, okay, like, these are our young people. These are the future of Maine. How do we create a situation that is going to be empowering and hospitable to individuals who may have a little bit more work to do and may need a little bit more assistance? And actually, before this, I came from, I've been on the board of Maine Inside Out for 5 years prior to stepping into this role 3 years ago. So Maine Inside Out 8 years ago. But during that time, I was working in other capacities, and I was working largely with workforce development. And I hate to say it, but one thing that really changes hearts and minds is the economy. And here we are in the oldest state in the union, the whitest state in the union, going back and forth with Vermont, and we constantly seem to be, running neck and neck. And lo and behold, we're running in a situation where we're running out of the labor base. And all of a sudden people are like coming to me left and right, like, oh, I know you're a returning citizen and you're working with returning citizens. That's a labor pool that is one of the last labor pools that exists. How can we access your people? And how can we access the young asylum seekers that you're working with and that demographic? And so I hate to say it, but I think that economic pressure has led us to a place where we can have different dialogues than we were before. I hate the fact that it takes people's wallets and pocketbooks to start like opening up those conversations, but here we are. And so because of that, people are willing to say, okay, if I'm going to hire an individual, maybe I can't just be like, okay, I'm going to hire you and expect you to succeed. So what are the other components and what are the other resources that exist in society that can help this individual to succeed? And I think with young people, even more so, and Joseph, I heard you saying this before I got kicked off of the from the tech thing, is that, it is about other resources. Nothing that Maine Inside Out can do can be everything. We do have all the resources that were mentioned around like mutual aid and this and that, but we're not a social services agency. But we have some great relationships in the community where we can leverage those and say, okay, I know you need this means of support. I can reach out to this person. I can do this and I can reach out to this person. And so it really, when they say it takes a village, it takes an entire ecosystem. Like beyond the village, it takes other resources. It takes other it takes other counselors, it takes other sources of funding, it takes all of these pieces. And so I think what we can do with art is create a table by which we can all convene, and then from there we build those relationships so that we can support the individuals that we have. Because Maine Inside Out, we're a small team. We're at any given time we're 12 people or less, right now. And so we're trying to be all things to all people and recognizing we can't do that. But people need us. The young people we work with need us. The economy needs us. Families need us. All of those things need us. And so I think it creates a mandate that Maine Inside Out is ready to fulfill in being the convener. But we cannot be the community within ourselves. So what we're really trying to do is invite the community to come in and be supportive of a greater whole.
Well said.
I think too, with the community being involved, it reduces stigma. And I think that's one of the worst things for youth right now is this labeling. We go and label people, oh, they're a bad child. Come on. They're not a bad child. Something along the way happened that led them astray, or they didn't have the resources they needed, or, let's really look at the truth of what happens. It's easy to place the blame.
Mountain View is fully underway, and we do have a play that we're hoping to premiere in a couple of months. And then Joseph and I run what's called the Landing Pad, which is where we take our members that have been through our programming, whether it be through they could have been through Mountain View. A lot of them are like, now that we have Mountain View, we're welcoming those individuals who've been through our programs there into our Landing Pad. But we have this base of what we call our OG members who have been through our playmaking process, through either our time that we were doing work in Long Creek. We did community groups for a very long time in 4 different communities. And so Joseph and I spend a lot of time supporting those individuals, but additionally helping them to continue to make art. And that art is less, we don't have time to get together and make plays the way that we did initially with these individuals. But so we do a lot of written and spoken word. And I'll say, I'll just pump up Joseph a little bit. He's a poet, and his background is in poetry, and he's an incredible artist in that capacity. And I dabble myself, and we have other individuals who are musicians who are part of our organization. A lot of MCs who practice hip hop as their means of communication, slam poets, storytellers, all of those individuals. So we do several events throughout the year, including a Juneteenth event that focuses around racial justice and its intersection with the criminal justice system. We do that obviously in June in Lewiston, and we've done that several years running, and we continue to do that. And we do open mics where we have our performers come in, do their poetry, do their music, and then also invite a featured guest, and then also open it up to the larger community to hear what it is that they want to perform around. And so that's a means by which we connect. So that's one thing. And Joseph, if you have anything that you want to add to that.
No, you did well. You did good.
I have a quick question before I forget. Where can people view past events that you've had?
Well, we have some. They do look Maine Inside up on YouTube. We have some stuff that will pop up for them, so you can get to see past films that we've created, talking about past shows. I don't know necessarily that we have a whole lot of plays that we have recorded, but I think some of our films incorporate some of those plays. So yeah, you can just look up Maine Inside Out on YouTube, and you should be able to pull some stuff up.
Okay, and how about people that are in the community, all of us adults out here that are listening to you, or people that are inside listening to you? What can we do to support the work that Maine Inside Out and Maine Youth Justice and Mindbridge, all of these organizations, what can we do?
Well, I want to say go to MaineInsideOut.org, and if you can, hit the donate button, and Maine Prison Advocacy Coalition .org, hit the donate button, and MaineYouthJustice.org. hit those donate buttons. And you know, and with Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition, you can volunteer. We have community strategy meetings that happen once a month, the second Saturday of each month from 10 to 12 at Maine Inside Out office. And so that's also available by Zoom. And and come to our open mics. And and I guess lastly, November 3rd, there will be a performance held at Mountain View Correctional Center that's open for the public. And so if somebody wants to go, please reach out because there's some security clearance stuff, but it'll be a public showing of that theater. And then lastly, we're not currently in the schools this fall, but starting in January, we'll be back in there. And so around April, be looking forward to teenage shows.
I'll go back to that theme of community, which is if you want to support us, and I don't know if Joseph already named this, come to our performances, be in contact, be in community with us, support a young person that, that the young people that we never see are young people that have found support elsewhere. And so be a part of that elsewhere. I think that that's vital. We have amazing programs throughout the state that are doing that stuff. I was a skateboarding kid. And so I'm looking at what's going on in like the Bath skate park, which I was doing a lot with Jamie Dorr, and looking at other stuff that's going on in Rockland, and looking at stuff that's going on, and also the adult recovery community, because many young adults are finding themselves there as well as full adults. So recognizing that pitching in different capacities, even if it's not directly with our organization, is helping to be preventative and engaged, and also recuperative after the fact too, whether we know you're doing it or not. You're out there doing it. We appreciate it.
October 19th at the Afro Taste Restro on Main Street in Lewiston is our next open mic from 5:30 to 7. Show up and come be
Share
with us in
some
the
art.
community. Yeah, share some art. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, and I do want to say too that Maine Inside Out, I don't know if you still have them or not, but you had some great hoodies on there. It's getting chilly out. I sport in one, I tell you.
We'll be at the recovery rally this weekend
Yes.
in Lewiston. We may have some there, and also if we hear a mandate, we'll print more out.
Yeah.
All right, great. Hey, I want to let my listeners know we've had Joseph Jackson and Bruce King here today from Maine Inside Out. I want to thank both of you. Even though we had some technical difficulties, I'm sure we'll have a great piece in the end.
Sounds good.
I just want to plug, I remember when you were starting this, and you were working with Professor Caniff or whatever it is that he went by, my buddy Jason, and so
Yeah,
love what this
great.
is doing, and I hope people continue to tune in and listen.
Yeah. And thank you for
You have been listening to The Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.